Okay, we have a pretty light agenda tonight. But for starters, let's start where we always do. Let's look at the minutes from the February meeting that Kevin kept. And because I wasn't here, Kevin always takes great minutes, and they really came in handy because it really allowed me to try to put together what transpired at the February meeting, and having a chance to talk to a couple of you as well to sort of piece it together. I listened in, I listened to the recording, and again, there was microphone trouble, so the first 15 or 20 minutes, there was no sound. And then after that, I was catching about every third word, so we've got some real challenges when it comes to our remote capabilities. So I think that's something the borough needs to have a conversation about that, because it really makes it hard for people to.
Maybe the owl will have an audiologist.
Yeah, the owl might need to have a little intervention.
Yeah.
Anyway, but as I say, your minutes were really helpful in putting it together and kind of figuring out what needed to go into the record of action, which we're filing with the. So anyway, okay, so have you had a chance to look at it, and do we have a motion to approve then?
Dennis, I do have a question if you don't mind.
I'll go right ahead.
Just reading over the council meeting minutes recently, I see that when it comes to voting, it's in like a graph form, like a chart, and it's either, absent, approve, or deny, a yay, nay. And ours is kind of motion to approve, seconded, and then motion carried. I'm not sure if we need to actually state who voted individually for what. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else can answer that.
Oh, you mean beyond having a motion, a second, and a vote?
Yeah, like the way the council approvals are, it's like on a name by name basis, yay, nay, or absent.
Are we being asked to do that, Kevin?
I'm reviewing the minutes. I just noticed this is just formatted differently, and I wasn't sure if that was a legal issue or just like a preference.
Okay, well, other organizations boards them on, we just usually do a motion, a second, and then it's a small enough group. I mean, the council has a lot more people, but we can check with Matt about that, maybe do it differently in the future. Because it's not really a vote on an item where you really want to know how different people stand on which one. We don't have abstentions typically from minutes approvals, but
Sometimes.
anyway, sometimes, yeah, once in a while.
Planning commission has had a few of those.
Okay, all right, well, so let's motion to approve the message. I think you made that motion. Second, and then all those who approve, Kevin Block. Yeah, Kevin approves,
Yeah.
Carl.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, and Kevin Walsh, right, okay, so we have seven yeas and no nays. Okay, great. All right,
So we did vote unanimously,
we did,
although you were absent.
last one.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, so, let's see, so then moving on to our first item on the agenda, we have a COA application to review for rehabilitation work proposed at 105 Dudley Avenue. And I sent the link out to all of you, so you had a chance to give it a look. It's a fairly straightforward project, the replacement of the existing porch, which had been enclosed at some point in the distant past, the 30s or 40s, probably. There was a real estate photo that showed this house looking pretty much exactly like it looks now, quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so with this project, and I have the plans, we can spread it out and give it a look, but it entails the removal of the porch, changing out of two front windows, which are tall windows, to shorter ones to accommodate the different slope of the porch roof. The existing porch roof is very shallow, and this would have a sort of probably a 3.5 and 12 pitch to it. So anyway, so I can spread these out, and We have Marlene's here that's gonna answer any questions and sort of fill us in. You want to fill us in on the project a little bit and?
So we've got, well, Kyle, do you want me to talk or do you want to talk?
Go for it.
So, we bought the whole parcel, we bought 105 and the shingled house next to it, the, I guess that's 109, 111. And we're just trying to bring them back to probably what their original state was and have them looking a little bit better. There is vinyl siding on 105 now and it covers the entire front. And if you go in that porch, there's the most beautiful brick on the front of the building with this really great pattern. And I think an open porch will just go better in the neighborhood and show off that brick, and seems like the house is begging for that to just come off. So yeah, that's it. We're trying to bring both properties up to modern living standards. We plan to rent them.
And, so then so what are the, so you're gonna re-side the house as well, so that was part of it, or are you?
I probably residing the house. What do you think, Kyle?
I don't know that we're doing that in the short term. I think ultimately we'd like to reside the house. I'm really curious to pull some of the siding off and see what would have been under there initially. But I think in this first phase, I think we're gonna, we'll take when we take that porch off, we're gonna take all that siding off. But I don't know that it's in the first phase budget to do the rest of the siding at this.
It's not a point that that we're concerned with from a review standpoint. It was more just out of sort of curiosity what the plans are for the house. And actually, I think we briefly the other day talked about the possibility for having the roof slope on the porch be a little bit shallower in order to create a little bit of breathing space between the windows and the porch. It's kind of better detail for like for snow loading, and it's easy to flag that. So we thought that might be plausible.
Oh, man,
Yeah.
the flashing detail of the windowsill of the second floor windows would be a little tricky. And I think as Dennis suggests, you get a more watertight detail if you give a couple of brick horses worth of space between. But 4 and 12 is certainly comfortable looking.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what was there once upon a time?
The windows upstairs are door height. I mean, they're actual windows that you lift up,
Yeah.
but they are the size of a door. It's very strange. It doesn't seem exceptionally safe to me to be walking out on a flat roof, which was also part of the idea of giving it a sloped roof and bringing up the windows.
It's so shallow. I almost wonder, it's with those windows being so tall, almost wonders if it was kind of like a porch.
I wonder that, except that the windows themselves seem like they could potentially be original.
No, I think they probably are. But
And so, I mean, I guess someone could have opened the windows and then ducked
yeah.
under. There's not enough height to actually walk through the window. You can open it, but then you'd have to duck under. It would have been a very uncomfortable roof
I
down.
would think so. Yeah.
So,
It's a New Orleans detail,
Yeah.
yes.
right?
So Dennis,
Houses were taxed based on how many doors they had.
Oh, so they would put
So-
windows.
So access, I just learned this during a trip to New Orleans about a month ago. The way around that to get to the second floor balconies, which are everywhere in New Orleans,
Yeah.
was that windows were the way to get to the deck, and they were tall windows that went almost to the floor.
Interesting.
And they functioned just fine for getting out on the balconies. I thought that was a fun discovery.
Kyle, you start say something?
yeah, we did study changing the slope from 4 and 12 to 3.5 and 12, and we're confident we can do that. It'll lower that roof, probably about 6 inches or so from the bottom of that windowsill, which will definitely improve the flashing, our ability to flash it there. And it doesn't change the look substantially.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's and I think they're Jim, aren't there these like they're sort of additional membrane underneath, if there's any concern about it not being a steep enough pitch that.
Oh, it's a steep.
It is, yeah.
3.5 is kind of a limit for ordinary shingles to function properly. Would you agree?
3 and 12.
3 and 12 is the absolute limit,
Yeah.
at which point the water starts to wick underneath
Mm.
the shingle below, and 3.5 is fine.
And, Kevin Walsh, he's okay code wise with that?
From a zoning code perspective, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's fine.
Okay, great. Good.
We're gonna end up doing a fully adhered membrane under that roof. We own a construction company, and we will not do a shingle roof less than 4 and 12 without a fully adhered membrane. So it's a minor thing to do, but it'll just with the sort of increasing intensity of storms and wind driven rain getting back up under there, just adding that layer below it will address the concern.
Okay, great, terrific. All right, good. Are there any other comments and questions from our members?
I applaud what you're doing.
Yeah,
I wish everybody would do that.
yeah,
It's gonna look really good.
we're pretty
It
excited.
looks really good, and it's moving the building in the good direction.
Mhm.
And making up for
Yeah.
many years, God knows how many years of
Yes,
it looking terrible.
yes.
So,
Well, we're starting to get enough projects that are examples of what good looks like, that we can start to catalog them.
Yes.
And do a show and tell with folks.
Exactly. Yeah, because, there's a thing when you're doing like sort of public education and stuff, you really want to always try to use your good examples from in town and bad examples from like.
From out of town. Yeah.
So we're really, we're through a number of projects now, but this, I think the first one we've had was that reopening a kind of a badly enclosed porch. So, you can, you're the poster child so far. So
Great.
it's good.
Great, I'm glad to hear it.
So yeah, and I think, again, the reason we're looking at this specifically is, because of the fact that the windows on the second floor are being changed on the primary facade, that really kicked it into, and then changes to the porch, that's gonna kick it over to a COA review. But, okay, great, I think, everyone's in favor of it, so we'll, grant it, I'll write it up tomorrow and then get it sent over to Kevin. So Kevin, you'll be able to bring this to the council council on the 21st then, right, because their meeting is then, okay, I'll get the action written up for you tomorrow.
I have a
Yeah, thank
question.
you. I think we have 4 or 5 other ones on that night, so that'll fit perfectly.
Yes, perfect, okay, yes.
No objections to this, modification. I'm just curious to know the fascia and the columns that you're showing what material do you think you'll be using for that? And
What do you think, huh?
Yeah, so we're gonna be using HB&G columns, so it's a permacast column. If you're familiar with HB&G, and we're using Boral for the materials. So Boral is a fly ash based product that we've been using for many years in our construction company. We do a lot of preservation work, and it's a product that once it's painted up looks just like wood. It's very different than a cellular PVC product that'll move around a lot with the weather. It'll be a really nice material. It'll look just like wood.
So it's painted trim,
Mhm.
and it will look like.
Yeah.
We're using Boral on our porch.
I'm not familiar with it. Can you help me understand what that is? Somebody?
Yeah, Boral is a synthetic building material. It's you can look it up. I think it originally came out of New Zealand, but it's a building material that's made with primarily with fly ash. So it's like a cementitious. It's similar to probably similar to Hardy in a lot of ways if you're familiar with Hardy, except it comes in much thicker and longer profiles. It's much more stable. It's incredibly stable with weather. It's fire resistant. It's bug resistant. It is what's really, really interesting about it and why we've been using it really heavily is that you can mill it into any profile that you can mill wood into. In fact, the first job we did, it was probably about 10 years ago. It was in Lower Merion Township on Harriton Road. And the architect visited the project at the end, and he tapped on the siding. It was a board and batten siding. And he said, I thought you weren't going to use wood for this because you were concerned about rot. I said, we didn't use wood. And I mean, he was tapping on it and he didn't realize that it wasn't wood. We just finished in our construction company, we just finished a project at the corner of 4th and Locust, the Ship and Wistar House, which is it's a registered house from 1750 with John Milner Architects. All of the exterior millwork on that, like the rakes, the crowns, everything was Boral, and we matched the original profiles that we found throughout the project with it. But once it's painted up, you can't tell that it's not wood.
Did the millwork?
What's that?
Who did you get to do the millwork?
So the main company that mills this stuff is a company called Durations Millwork. They're out of New Jersey. They're an offshoot of a company called Hamilton Supply in Hamilton, New Jersey. Durations has become, in a short period of time, I think a much bigger business than the original millwork business. And they ship the stuff all over the US. In fact, it's become really, really difficult to get it because it's in such demand.
So why do you prefer it over wood? What's the advantage?
So it costs about the same as mahogany, in my experience, but it doesn't rot, it's insect proof, and it's fireproof. And it doesn't absorb water, right? So once you paint it,
So it's dimensionally stable.
yeah, and it's incredibly stable with temperature fluctuations, which is one of the big problems with AZEK.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, great. We'll take a vote. We'll take a vote. I think we kind of already know where we're landing. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the request for COA?
I so moved.
Been moved, second by Carl.
Yeah.
Okay, and we go around the room. Kevin Block.
Yeah.
Yay. Kevin Walsh. Both Kevins. I guess by sight of you, I had both Kevins.
And now we're being very formal, Kevin. You really got us there.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, Jen.
Yay.
Yay.
And I vote yes also.
Absolutely.
So great. Good. All right. Wonderful.
Great,
We'll
thank you.
look forward to seeing the work as it moves forward. And yes, we had some good photos and submitted, and we may kind of want to shoot a few more, and then
Yeah.
get some photographs during and after. I think because I think it's going to be a really nice show and tell project for us, and great to sort of stay in touch and keep the conversation going with you all.
Great, thank you so much, I appreciate it, thank you for all your time.
Let the record reflect that these are some excellent drawings.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You don't always see excellent drawings.
Well, it's an excellent firm.
It's an excellent firm.
Yeah.
And
We paid handsomely for them, but we wanted to get it right.
I had taken pictures of a couple of houses in Narberth that I liked and showed them to him, and then he drove around more and took more pictures, and he took his time, he really did a nice job.
That's good. That's good.
But when he showed us, these are almost the exact first plans that he showed us. He drew them, showed them to us, we were like, that's it, you got
Nailed
it.
it.
that's what
So,
you get when you pay handsomely.
it is, there didn't have to be.
Sometimes.
As you were saying, the building kind of told you what it wanted.
It really
in a
did,
way.
I
It's
mean,
really nice to,
yeah.
Did you find historic photos as references?
we found historic photos with the enclosed porch with vinyl siding on it.
No.
That's what's on the Narberth Archive historic.
Yeah,
Site.
actually, that photo, that was even pre-vinyl, so
I
that's
know.
probably like maybe an aluminum or
Right.
even like maybe a asbestos board.
It looks almost exactly the same though,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so,
yeah, it really does. I mean,
It really does.
It's remarkable how
Yeah.
much.
With 20 or 30 coats of paint, everything looks the same.
thankfully, they did not paint the brick. So when you
Yes.
go up into the porch, the brick is untouched,
Yeah.
it's beautiful, it's really nice, I'm excited.
Is that Flemish bond?
It's got these little triangular patterns of a slightly different color brick within the brick,
I have a diaper pattern.
it's really nice.
And it has, and I know that they've got those really sweet little high windows.
Yes,
Right by.
with the little triangles, yeah,
So you know
Yeah.
that there's like a piece of furniture,
yes.
No, I didn't know.
See it with the nice little cornerstone, it's really just, very nice detail,
It's very pretty.
it's actually really good.
We're geeking out here with this.
I know, I love it, I love it. I drove around for a whole day looking at porches, so. And
Yeah,
interestingly, I couldn't find a single porch in Narberth that had the flat roof,
right.
so I don't know where that came
And
from.
and those tall windows, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
I
very,
couldn't find them anywhere in
Well, they
Narberth.
don't perform very well, because
No.
people don't clean them.
yeah.
And they really truly are not that safe. To have a flat roof with no railing and windows that you could just walk right
A
out.
lot of them had railings, but the railings
Yeah.
didn't get maintained, and they rot out, and the
Yeah.
owners say, yeah, and throw it away. And
Yes.
so we see a bunch of low slope roofs that have evidence that there was once a railing.
Was there a scupper on there or?
I don't think so. And this photo that we did find from somewhere in the forties had no railing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it really looked just like.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was pretty early, so I went looking back to see if we had, because we had all these real estate photos from the forties on up through about 1980. So almost anything that would have been sold, this was a collection that a real estate agent gave to the Lower Historical Society when he retired. And so they have a whole filing cabinet, and Norbert has its own drawer. So, the guy who put that website together borrowed them all and scanned each and every one of them, and then
Wow.
has them, so you can do all searches on addresses.
So this would be for properties that had sold in that
Yes.
period.
At some
yes.
point,
If
that's all.
it turned over, yeah, and it's great because you got little notifications, you got price changes. There's really, I mean, Graham is our real estate broker.
Yeah.
So it really is, there's really a wealth of information, about the.
Well, we bought this from the original owner. It was just passed down through the family, which is probably why there aren't very many photos of it if it never was listed for sale.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're pretty sure the grandfather built this house.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think-
himself.
I think Kyle and I talked about this the first time we met, is that the big house,
Mhm.
which had gotten bigger, that was where Edward Hawes lived.
Yes,
And he was a plasterer by trade, and had the contract, he did all the interior plaster work in the YMCA building in 1908. So
the
he
one that was in Ardmore.
No, the one here, we had the
Oh.
YMCA building here, it closed as a Y in the 20s. But you can still see it was right downtown, and they built an addition off the front of it. But originally it was set back, it's on Forest, so it's right on the corner
Okay.
of Forest and Haverford Avenue. It has it has a double pediment, a very
What is
classic.
it now?
It's
It's the end building of,
Multi-tenant commercial property at
Okay.
the corner.
and it's obscured by the smoke shop.
Okay,
Yeah, the smoke
Addition.
shop runs
Yeah.
on the side of it.
yeah,
And then you've got all commercial on the Haverford Avenue side.
right,
Really unusual building, because here's like a civic building that had commercial along one side of it from the very beginning.
right.
So it's kind of all about when Narberth was becoming, they wanted a civic core, they wanted a commercial core. And that was part of that initial changeover around 1900 to try to create a downtown
That's so neat.
area. And yeah, there's a collection of photographs. One of the Hawes was leaving town a number of years ago. She gave a collection of photographs to Bill Martin, who was the then borough manager. And he shared them with me a long time ago, and we scanned a lot of them. And I just ran into him the other day, and so I've asked him, whatever happened to those photos, because we really would like to do higher
Yeah.
res scans of them, because it has the YMCA under construction, it has the
Yeah.
cornerstone laying, it's got, because he documented, Hawes documented all of this,
That's
because he was
neat.
working on it. So, yeah, so I'll keep you guys posted on it, if we get the original photos.
If you find
but-
something, yeah.
But, we're trying to learn more about people who were doing things early on,
Yeah,
and he was, and as you said, his family, that was the same.
that was, yes. And it seems like they did kind of add on as they lived there in the shingle.
In the shingle, and yeah, and then there's all the garages in the back.
Yeah.
So like, but,
Yeah.
But great, so.
Anyway, well, thank you all. Have a great
Okay,
evening.
very welcome.
Thank you for your time.
And enjoy your time away, Kyle. Okay?
Thank you.
Our son's
Thanks.
last college spring break, so they went, this was before he gets a real job. And
Or, and there's always grad school, that was always.
There's always grad school, that's true. Have a good
Take care.
evening.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye now. Okay, okay. Great. Okay, so, we only have one other item, and this is the one that we added, the Jen, and I was able to hear part of that on our tape, you know. And then the memo, Jen wrote a memo, a follow-up memo, which is an addendum onto the minutes. But Jen, you want to talk a little bit about what the thought is, and then we'll sort of talk about
You know, I have
what
to
to do?
firstly just sort of admit to having to overcome a bit of intimidation in voicing my opinion about this. I felt when the cat's away, you know, we should all behave. But in the discussion that happened in this room, Kathleen was here and, you know, we were here, and Ruben's team gave a great presentation. They showed photographs of the interior conditions of the buildings. It was really convincing. We were all just kind of in agreement after seeing the photos. And so the question, without, I didn't mean to go on about not having enough time to really think about it, but really not having enough time to think about it. But the question just started to sort of ferment in terms of, we know we're dealing now with deconstruction or demolition, as it's referred to on our permit drawings, in a historic district. But wholesale demolition feels a bit wild. And I actually have been working on specifications for several historic projects at the firm I work for. And I'm very familiar with all of this sort of terms and conditions that you can place on how you take a building apart, what you document, what you keep, what's very important. And this is all sort of embedded in the responsibility of the architect, not just to draw up plans and have your building meet, you know, setbacks and zoning and make it functional and all of those types of things. But also from a specifications point of view, the architect thinks about what are the materials of this building, how is it coming apart, and how is it going back together. So that was sort of in my headspace already. But when I heard Kathleen say in a conversation after the meeting had closed, and she and I both were sort of on the same page when we were talking about deconstruction as a responsible building practice. Afterwards, she said this is something that she's been working with at Lower Merion Conservancy, that, you know, she's trying to generate more support for defining deconstruction within historic preservation. And I said to her, you know, let's work on this. So I basically just thought, as you suggested, Section 8, we could further articulate a few specification sections that we would require, or request, I guess, that we would request to sort of elaborate on the intentions of the architect in developing a building in a historic district in Narberth. I'm not sure that this is going to come up very often, but maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. But in the case that it does, at least we can say that we will have the building documented. We will have the architect specify what is to be taken apart. And we will also ask the architect to tell us what they're going to do with the materials that they are taking apart. Will it be recycled? Will it be salvaged? For, you know, there are plenty of places here in Philly that will take used materials and figure out a creative way to reuse them. So that having been said, so I drafted up this memo and, you know, I wrote to, I don't know who I'm talking to. So I sent it to Todd Bressie and you and Fred Bush. And I'm like, let's just get it out there on the table and see if there's any objection, because Todd Bressie is chair of Planning Commission, had wrote in their recommendation letter to council, There are some things that we know they haven't quite figured out yet, so we're gonna ask this team to come back when they're finished with the construction documentation and tell us what they're gonna do. I don't remember the specifics right now off the top of my head, but, so I thought, well, let's piggyback off that idea and, ask them to come back with their specifications. When they go to planning commission with their documents, they can come to us with their specs. And, I put it out there, crickets, so I thought, okay, no objections. So I showed up at the council meeting 2 days later, and because I wanted to put it in front of the borough solicitor. And I wanted to get some kind of agreement from Ruben's team to say, first of all, there's no added service required here. It is already within the responsibility of the architect to write up specifications. We're just saying, make sure you include these sections. But I just wanted some form of agreement from Ruben's team, because I really felt that this was a reasonable ask, and it was really an efficient way to be responsible about demolition in a historic district. And so that's kind of where that all landed. And so when you made the suggestion more, yesterday or whatever it was, about including in a section 8, I thought that sounds like a reasonable and efficient way
Yeah,
to deal with
well,
this.
because basically documentation is already included. That's what I was saying, talking about section 8, because that's already something that's within, it's granted us by the ordinance to be able to recommend to council in the event that they approve a COA, that we can also ask council to require that there be documentation. And we see this all the time when, you're having to, if there's gonna be a negative action against an historic building, the sort of one thing you can usually get is to have the documentation done so that you're losing the building, you don't necessarily have to lose all the information that the building provides. So a lot of times they're like, it's not really to have standards, but there are stipulations that government entities can make, in lieu of preservation of the actual thing, that you'll at least have, professionally done photographs and any kind of descriptive material. So there's usually a written component, to it also. But you have, so you have that. So, that requires, say, a photographer and or historian goes in and documents the interior, the exterior, with a complete set of photographs. And then this case, and one of the things that our ordinance already grants us is the ability to do that. What I would say that is because of the fact that these are kind of storefronts, especially those kind of 6 that are together. So we really don't know what's underneath those. And because of not knowing that, and I think that's one of the reasons these were listed as contributing buildings anyway, because it wasn't known. And so you can't write them off and say they no longer can contribute. So they were included in the historic district. But to be able to, to have them take those facades off carefully, so that if there is historic material underneath, you can document that too before it all goes away. So it seems like what you're suggesting is sort of another, or sort of a step beyond that, where you're asking questions about how, how materials might be used. It's not specifically within the HARB's current purview, but it's something that we could certainly encourage council to be doing. And just have a funny kind of an aside, at the planning commission's meeting, the other day, I was sitting near one of the co-owners of Shift, and she said she had conversations with Tim about they really liked their floor, the historic floor, and they talked to him about because they were all about reusing, so the ability to maybe harvest that floor and actually use it in their eventual space. There's certainly a zeitgeist along this line also. But I think it's good that we're talking about it here. And my only concern is that sort of in sort of carrying it forth to borough council, in that in other words, this wasn't something that was being carried forth on behalf of the HARB. You were doing this as a private person, not as the HARB, because we hadn't had a chance to really talk about it yet. And they may or may not have made that distinction, and that distinction may not, matter. But,
it was also entirely coincidental that you were not present, and that it happened so quickly, and that council was having a meeting, and it was about approving demolition, and I really felt like, I was just gonna run it into the end zone myself. I was gonna call the play and run it into the end
Call
zone.
it audible, as we say. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but I wasn't doing it to be like,
Well, see,
a
council
show
wasn't,
off, or
council
like,
wasn't looking at they weren't looking at demolition yet because they hadn't gotten the CO, they hadn't gotten the record of action that then allows them to move forward with it. So that's they said they're gonna be meeting on the 21st. They'll have the record of action. They'll be able to act on it
Mhm.
at that point. But that wasn't a meeting that was gonna be, where they were gonna be
Yeah.
doing that. But I mean, one of the things, in, sort of the context for this too, I think, is that one of the things we need to do is we need to really go through the ordinance, and, we've been in this for like, a year and a half or so now, to be able to, or 2 years, to be able to kind of say, okay, are there changes we'd like to make? So I really would like to try to put together a whole list of modifications that we'd like to bring to John Walco and bring to the borough, if they think that there are modifications. Now that we've kind of seen the way, sort of preservation is and isn't working here, that if there are things within our ordinance that we think should be tweaked, and I actually had this conversation with Kathleen too, because she was, instrumental in getting this thing put together. So she was part of that team of folks who had done it. And so she's particularly interested in this also.
I mean, the other thing I would like to point out is that, I do think that as a matter of precedent, we should be careful about not just what we approve, but how much, freedom is given to our applicant in terms of how demolition is handled. And I think to at least I have 3 specification sections in mind. In the special project procedures, which also sometimes is called like historic, and I'm sure you know all this, but for those who might not, historic project procedures, or, it's specifically, the language is specifically geared toward, we recognize that this building is significant, and this is why we're gonna take great care in terms of documenting and, salvaging and whatever. What happened in front of council was, maybe it was a case of mistaken identity, but on planning commission, I've been talking about green building practices. And so they're like, so you wanna put this with EAC? And I was like, no, this isn't responsible construction practices like embodied carbon and that kind of thing. This is responsible deconstruction practices, which is sort of like the two obviously dovetail, but just so I made it clear that this is a HARB thing, not to say I represent HARB, but just to say as an entity, this is something under the purview of historic architecture. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
So what kind of response did you get from the council?
Borough solicitor turned to Tim Rubin, turned to, Nancy Bastian, and said, Nancy, do you agree to write specifications? And she's, okay. So she was
Nancy
gonna-
never says no.
I'm sure that her lawyer told her just say yes.
No clue. She has no clue what the specs are.
I mean, and
She's
that,
never done a preservation project.
I know. And I wanna be careful about this, but because I'm familiar with it and I work on it pretty frequently, I'm like,
There's a preservation,
A lot
there's a preservation component here.
I know, and I know that a lot of architects don't write specifications,
Yeah.
but I do, so I'm like, I'm material, I'm a material
Well,
witness.
they're typically contract, they work with spec writers.
Yes,
Voice.
No, there's some,
And with
Yeah.
decorative.
yeah.
but I mean, what Dennis is saying is, from Carl,
Carl, yeah.
I know someone named Carl Dennis. What Carl is saying is that they're not specifically a preservation firm. So it's not like, they may write specifications, but that may not be in their list of.
They are the antithesis of a preservation firm.
Yeah.
Their work shows it, and that stuff in front of you shows it. And the drawings for 230 Haverford show it. They're capable, modern, downtown commercial designers. That's what they do. They have never, I'm not surprised, if it's literally true, they have never done a preservation project. In my days with the firm, many eons ago, they did do preservation or sensitive, let's call it sensitive renovation projects. Not go quite so far as to say they were preservation projects.
Decent rehab project.
Yeah, and there was a sensibility about the preservation characteristics of doing that kind of work.
Yes, yeah,
But,
yeah,
you know, in the
Yeah.
intervening decades,
yeah.
and I do literally mean decades, they drew apart from that kind of work and haven't done any since.
Now, that's interesting because I was thinking that, like say in the nineties, when cafe culture was really sort of coming on the scene, there was this, very cool, character about an exposed brick wall.
Yeah.
Juxtaposed with like an industrial interior. And the juxtaposition of the two, the old and the new, was very cool.
The
It
landing
made-
kitchen,
What?
the landing kitchen,
Yeah.
there it is, you're looking at it, it's right in front of you.
But I think what has happened over time is that those brick walls have not gotten the attention they deserve, and now we're like putting thin brick on CMU. Or, you know, like, now we're trying to replicate, like it in, you know what I'm saying, but,
Well, back at the same time, the eighties and nineties, because that's when I was reviewing tax act applications. And you had a lot of sort of industrial, like chocolate works, I mean, a lot of the downtown wire works, and different. And so they were sort of taking walls and exposing brick walls that had plaster on them. And, they would invariably be sandblasted, so they damaged the brick, and, those things never stopped shedding dust. After that, but we were routinely making them cover walls again that they had exposed the brick on, because we could, with that program, we could review and enforce the interiors of buildings as well as the exteriors. So, and that was a lot, I mean, that was like, yeah, that was exposed brick central at that moment, but anyway, okay.
Can we go back to what you're proposing? I just want to make sure I understand. You're talking about inventorying and cataloging and documenting into what, and then for what ultimate purpose? Where does it go? What do you do with that information?
well, I'll just take a stab at it. But, I think it's kind of like in concept, if you build it, they will come. If you tell them to include these specification sections, they will do the due diligence that is required of those specification
The
sections.
specification is how you deconstruct, the process of deconstructing.
A specification is like a love letter to your contractor. It's like, please use copper flashing of this gauge and, mechanically fastened, and here's the fastening pattern of the nails and how we want to see it. And here's, it's like putting a magnifying glass. What?
It gives direction.
It gives direction. Yeah. It's like saying everything you want to see in the field. It's like you take the field condition, and if there is dirt on the wall, you tell them, clean the dirt off the wall and then match the mortar, or, whatever. It's a very super detailed level of specifying what is to be built and what materials to use.
I'm confused. I thought this is, you're talking about the demolition process. Now you're talking about.
Well, demolition is part of, you specify construction waste management, special project procedures, selective demolition, what to destroy and what not to destroy, how to take things apart, what to document.
I would only comment that it's not a love letter.
Yeah.
It's
Well, you know what?
prescriptive.
But it's a letter that will
It's a-
never be read, so it doesn't.
Often it's not read, but it gives you a leg to stand on when you don't like what you see in the field.
Right,
So the
It also-
language is, you shall do this.
And more, and I think probably more to the point, it covers all the warranty aspects of what you're building. You know, because if you don't tell them that this flashing has to lap up the wall, and then they don't lap the flashing up the wall and there's a roof leak or whatever leak 10 years later, that warranty
So
failure.
what's your question?
So I was trying to understand because what I was hearing first was this is on demolition. But now I'm hearing you're saying it's about really specifications in the construction, so I'm just confused
Well-
about what it's.
Well, it's a specification for demolition, just as a specification for construction tells a contractor and his subcontractors how to build. This is telling them how to
How
unbuild
to take it apart. Yeah. Yeah.
and what to do with the products of demolition. Sometimes it's just a matter of haul them off the site, get them, I never want to see them again. And sometimes it's gonna be much more elaborate than that. But
Are they,
you tell them, so there's no question.
so they're not guidelines, they are thou shalt.
They're
Yes.
prescriptive.
Yes,
Mhm.
and you can say,
The word shall is used.
Yeah.
Repeatedly.
50% of waste must be recycled. And they must find then a, waste removal company that recycles 50% of the content that they collect.
Are they doing this in Philadelphia?
Yes,
A lot. More and more.
Is it in the code that they say that you shall, you must?
Well, that's the language that the spec writer uses to make it an imperative statement.
correct,
It's not a suggestion, it's an imperative.
that's right.
And it has to be used
But then,
judiciously, I have to
but you
say.
said it's often not referred to, right? So,
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
there's
That's where the construction management.
question of enforcement. I mean, you have intention and then
Sure,
It's
in the field,
architect's-
does it get adhered to?
Yeah, it's the architect's job. So in the
So
field,
it's self-governed, it's self-regulated, really?
no,
No, well, it happens, I mean, the question is, the architect who writes the specification may not be there unless they engage them for construction management, and that came up in the meeting.
that's true, that's
That came
true.
up in the meeting, and that was really interesting, because I mean, you have no control over what happens if as an architect, you've got liability. And, an architect typically, if they're not engaged to do management of the construction project, if they're not engaged, they will oftentimes make sure they're written out, because they're liable for something to go wrong, yet if they don't provide oversight, they're at risk, they're at high risk, so.
If somebody else is doing the application of their
Yeah,
intention.
and they're not following it, or, and yet they're the ones, I mean, they're the ones who had a steel drawing that, it was their license seal that was carrying things through, and,
So then to what extent is there actual oversight by the part of the borough or whatever?
Well, let's look at the two buildings that are going up on Haverford right now that everybody's complaining about because they're not built to spec.
Right,
They're not built to spec.
right.
Am I right?
I don't know,
Well, yeah, I didn't see those drawings either.
I don't know. I have not seen the construction drawings. Kevin is not supposed to be looking at all of the quality of construction, it's not his job.
right,
He's looking for code violations, and that's enough of a full-time job for him.
Oh,
We have
yeah.
talked about the wisdom of having a third-party inspector hired by the borough, paid for by the contractor,
Hmm.
to relieve the borough from the expense of hiring said inspector to check the quality of construction based on the poor quality of construction that we have observed, casually observed. Just sidewalk superintendent type of observation of the buildings that are going up now, which are clearly deficient in some areas. And there's.
To the naked eye, to the uninformed person,
Yes.
really.
Yes. So it is my understanding that the architect of record in the case of those two buildings was not hired for construction and administration, so they were not on the scene during construction.
Well, somebody has to be.
Yeah, so there's a lack of quality
No, they
control.
don't. No, they don't.
For what it's worth, in our 2 hour and 45 minute staff meeting today, I was adamant about that being relayed into the conditional use / prelim final approval that would be heard by council on the 21st. Like,
That's
I
good.
mean, because realistically, it's not even, you guys will all appreciate it, but it's really coming down to how Eric Johnson and I, the current contractor or project manager, if you want to call him that, they're turning to us as being the project manager, which is so backwards right now. So we're trying to get them to either pay, which would end up being either Panoni or Yerkes, to have somebody do it, again, paid for by Tim and company, or you pay your architect, or maybe a third-party special inspector that's approved by the borough. That, I mean, I can't tell you how much time I spoke about that today for 2:30.
That's good.
Good for you.
I can
Well-
imagine, Kevin.
Kevin, does that require some change in process procedure to make that happen?
No, I don't think we can actually force it. The way it needs to happen is it needs to be part of the either conditional use hearing, which it wasn't, but it's been recommended for the prelim final as a condition that it's like part of council / planning commission approving it, and whether or not Bob Careless and Tim agree to that, or council enforces that and holds that to be like a big piece of the approval. It's yet to be heard, but there's like 3 or 4 pieces that they're really adamant. The borough is adamant about keeping there and holding them to it.
Good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. And the thing is, I mean, I think the thing that, I mean, hopefully within contributing buildings, demolition will be a really rare thing, you know? But this is something that actually really would pertain to demolition of any buildings. It's really more than part of the heart, it really is part of the larger, I think, you know, sort of code issues and establishing ways of doing business, because, you know, there could be, you know, we see a lot of buildings coming down that are later than 1945 that we'll never have a look at, so we'll never have a role in those at all, but.
I mean,
but
that's a great point. I think, you know,
It's
right,
more global, so I'm saying that.
yes,
Yeah.
and right now we look at 1945 and we say, yeah, definitely 1945 and prior, but 100 years from now, what are we looking at?
Right, well, see, that's one of the things I think to really talk about is we should have a discussion about the way that our cutoff date is defined, how it was defined, and whether or not that makes sense moving forward. And whether or not, you know, maybe there's a cutoff date that we could recommend that would actually be later, because when they did the initial, they wrote it up 2 ways. And the state of Pennsylvania thought either one was fine, 1945, and one was I think a 1970 date. You know, so that picked up other buildings, because one of the things that actually Chloe with the Montgomery County Planning Commission, she put a whole like data sheet together that talked about construction, like, well, how many buildings were built when? And so as you might imagine, you know, in the teens, there was a lot, then there's like a slack off during World War I, and then in the 20s it picks up and we're going gangbusters, and there was, you know, a little bit of a slowdown during the Depression, but, you know, but there was still construction in the 30s, and then World War II started, you know, and then so that basically the 1940s was half the number of the 1930s, because you have the war in the first part, and then it picks up and it's very consistent. I mean, there is consistent amount of building activity in Narberth, residentially mostly, and also some commercial, straight on through, and it really only is in the late 60s that you really see it drop off. So if you're gonna look at sort of trends, we could really argue that there was a continuous trend of development throughout up until 1970. So what are you having in the 60s? In some cases, you're having like the cul-de-sacs, you're having larger properties that are being divided up, and you're having, you know, and they couldn't put streets through them easily, so you'd make these cul-de-sacs, and you have a lot of those coming off of Windward Road. But, you know, from a historical standpoint, to me, there's an argument to be made for the fact that one of the interesting things about Narberth, maybe more so even than, you know, we're a railroad suburb, I mean, there are a lot of railroad suburbs, but one of the things that's interesting to me is in this half square mile, you've got basically every type of housing type from 1870 to 1970, all in a really small area. And to me, that's kind of what makes the Narberth, you know, sort of more remarkable in some ways, that there are modern buildings and there are also modern commercial buildings. And at this point, we have no purview over as well. So, you know, I think that's something worth discussing at some point, because without that, as Graham was sort of alluding to, you know, and you were in terms of like, well, 100 years from now, so we could stand to lose all of the buildings from that period of time, from say the end of World War II up until say 1980. You know what I mean? So there's gonna be a whole chunk of building history that we're not gonna have because we don't have an ability to safeguard it at this point. So.
I mean, just to sort of close the loop on my spiel, in the big picture, whether it's Planning Commission, HARB, EAC, you name it, and you know, categorize the work. But in the big picture, I see this as being as much about responsible construction practices as it is about responsible deconstruction practices. And that ultimately, I think, is what is defining in sustainability as a movement. It's defining HARB's role in managing this demolition and all of these kinds of different approaches to a changing fabric that really all sort of respond to each other. And
so where does that function live? That's what I'm trying to get at too, is like where within borough government, within borough oversight, where does that properly live? I mean, because there are implications for historic buildings clearly, but there are broader implications as well. And so where's the regulatory, where does the rubber meet the road from the regulatory?
Rob McGreevy, former council member, and partner to, why am I forgetting her name?
Yeah. Yeah.
Environmental Advisory Council. I've had 1,000 conversations there. Anyway, completely blanking.
You're not as old as I am. I have
Completely blanking. But anyway, he said as he
Miriam
was.
Jack.
Yes, Miriam Shaka.
That's a really old guy with young ideas.
So he suggested, and, just as a response to your question,
Sure.
he suggested that the borough needs a sustainability manager. And that sustainability manager could be the inspector and could read over and review and that person probably would be maybe an architect or, like someone with a wider boots on the ground, can see the abstract and the real and bridge, administrative roles with it. Maybe that's one way, but I think a more direct way is just to say, for this very specific case, to say the architect can handle it. CBP should write those specifications, just at least fill them in and give it to the borough. And I was misinformed. I thought that CBP would do construction administration on this project, given all of these
I
specific.
think they will now.
I think so.
Yeah,
Because that was brought up at the meeting.
Okay,
Very good now.
yeah,
Well, sounds like
At the planning commission meeting.
from what, Kevin is telling us, that the borough is not gonna have it any other way.
Okay.
And the planning commission will have, driven that point home again in a summary that is being prepared right now.
Yeah.
Along with a bunch of other items that are not dead and buried yet. Yeah.
Okay,
I think we're open to CBP. I think we're open to CBP doing it, but somebody needs to be doing it, and it can't be done at what I call like my regularly scheduled inspections. I'm not there to schedule brick placement
yeah.
on a day, so somebody's going to be doing it at the expense of Tim. I mean, realistically, and that's whoever that is. We'll verify them, and that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
All right, let's
That's
move on.
good. So no, so I think we're, sorry, so, I think in terms of like sort of getting back to sort of your idea, I think the question is sort of where should that function live? I think it extends beyond historic buildings. And as I say, hopefully, we're not gonna be seeing, a lot of this kind of thing with listed buildings. I mean, we've got an ordinance that is really designed to not have this be the case.
I was thinking about the Church of the Evangel that did get in under the wire. And it was demolished and a historic building, and wouldn't it have been nice to have something?
That would have been a listed building,
Yeah,
had we had an ordinance in place at the time. Yeah, absolutely. And then where'd all the stone go? Right.
I do have videos and pictures from walking inside that before it was demoed. If anyone's interested.
Yeah, you know what, I have some too, Kevin, and that's what, all right, here's the other question, this is tied to your question too, which is an excellent question, which is, all right, we do this documentation, right? Where does the documentation live? Who curates it? So in other words, ideally, the borough, the borough should maintain this stuff. If we're gonna be asking the council to make sure that they do photographic documentation. Again, it should live in several places. There should be like a digital version, but there should, but that should be part of the record.
that should be within our function, I think, or squarely in our wheelhouse.
Yeah,
well,
but where does it physically live? And who makes sure that it gets preserved?
I
digitally.
mean, when Kathleen was here, she specifically turned to Ruben and team and said, please make sure you document what you're doing because that would be very useful to Lower Merion, to her in her position at Lower Merion Conservancy. So I don't know if they have some kind of like overarching, or if we as a borough are a separate entity, or if there is some combined archive. I think a combined archive would be very valuable.
Preferably it lives in more than one place. It should really live in several places. And at this point, in our ordinance, we do have the ability to ask council to do that and to make sure that this happens. And I talked to Kathleen about, people who do this, who do documentation. And she gave me a recommendation of someone she said is absolutely terrific. He's a photographer, he's an architect, he's curious, it's someone who has a really deep interest in building, so.
I think if there isn't any kind of adamant discussion of this, it won't happen. I think we'll allow it to sort of abide by.
Well, but see, that's why council this has to be part of, and again, this is what in our, section 8, when you get past like demolition 1 and then 2, which is about, economic hardship. 3 is, in the event that a certificate of appropriateness for demolition is issued, the HARD may recommend and Borough Council may require the property owner to produce to the borough at its own expense and to the satisfaction of the HARD written and/or photographic documentation of the contributing resource prior to the commencement of demolition activities sufficient to document the history of the contributing resource. So that's very, very clear. And then the only thing that I would add to that, it's in our ordinance. The only thing that I would add to that, because of the fact that we're dealing with a covered building, the unknown is what's underneath that, those later storefronts, that as part of this documentation, that this person also be able to photograph and take note of it and that they take those fronts off carefully to be able to be doing that. So it's within our wheelhouse right now to be able to recommend. And so in the record of action, that I'm putting together, in the recommendations, I'm putting this. So this is gonna be going into that. I think I sent you guys a draft of it to have a look at, and, I wanted to have you all look at it and tell me what you think of it, before I send it on to Matt. But, and Kevin, I sent you a copy of it as well, but, I'm sending this stuff through you to get to Matt, or am I sending this directly to Matt, or what?
The way I think it is, it's going straight to Matt, and then Matt'll, I guess, maybe, I don't know if he's bouncing it off to John or just kind of self-approving it, but it's not going through me. I know that.
Okay. All right, I'll do that then. But anyway, so, I'm including that in it because I think it is, it's something that really ought to happen. And I think it's, I'm just hoping the council goes along with it. They really should.
And just as a side note, there's a lot of overlap, I think, with these project-specific sections that make similar requests. But I think that it's more like, it's just more specific to the project. Anyway,
Sure,
I'll
yeah.
respond and I'll.
Yeah, no, but I think this, that's what I was saying initially, is that I think this piece that we have already is the smaller piece of what you're talking about as a larger whole. It's like, how do you deal with this stuff? And this is how you deal with it from a memory standpoint, from documenting what happened. You're talking about that, but you're also talking about sort of what happens to materials, where do they go, control over materials, control over potential reuse, similar to what Shift wanting to use the floor. People reuse floors all the time, what I mean? So it's a case of building in that awareness, So I think it's kind of an incremental thing, but, this is the piece that the HARB has control over. And I think that, what you're talking about is something that's more overarching.
The other thing that comes to mind with me is the disaster in Philadelphia that happened with the demolitions several years back with the Market Street disaster and the people dying. I assume that
Salvation Army.
Yeah.
I assume that all of the demolition is done with a very specific approach from a safety perspective. Because in Philly, when that happened, there was just zero oversight or accountability.
Yeah, the LNI really took it on the chin for that because they weren't.
Yeah, and they had to completely reform their
Yeah.
So
process.
Graham, to appease everyone there, I think you guys, most of you know, I worked at L&I when that happened. I worked at City Hall when that happened. I was a couple blocks away, but yeah, all of our demolition standards changed, our requirements for demolition contractors changed, and I've literally copied and pasted the requirements from L&I. They had to unfortunately learn from a bad scenario, but that's what I enforce in Narberth to a T. So people think it's really rough because you used to be able to come in with an application that said I'm demoing a 5-story building or whatever in Narberth, and you got a permit, and it is not the case anymore. It is not the case, anymore.
So you're saying you took from the Philadelphia regs to install here?
Yeah, if you look on the back of our Narberth demo application, it is verbatim Philly standards. From insurance down to site plans, down to site safety plans, to identifying an individual in charge. It is verbatim their requirements.
Good. Oh, that's true. I didn't know that. Kevin, I learn new things about you all the time. I didn't know that's
terrific.
That is terrific. I think wasn't one of the people who was killed, didn't their mother live in Narberth, or I'm trying to remember. There was some local connection to it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just remember. I know the operator, the inspector, and the engineer of record, which is all we heard of at L&I for a while. So
Yeah.
Thanks.
There should also be just as there should be a pre-construction meeting, there should be a pre-demolition meeting.
yeah, we did that. We did that at 198. Really at 198, the only concern we had was really what you're concerned about is, buildings that have a height that are exceeding the kind of fall zone, if you will. So, if you have a 1-story building 50 feet from a property line, you're generally not super concerned. But the tower, like the bell tower that was on the corner of Elmwood and South Narberth, So, you have to make them do that like brick by brick, which of course takes time, costs money, but that's the safest way to do it. So they cleaned up that site pretty good. I have to give it to them for the first big one in Narberth. That was handled pretty well.
Oh, you mentioned like having photographs and video. Several years ago, when it was first threatened, we thought it was gonna go pretty soon. I actually got a photographer in there and he shot photographs, exterior and a lot of interior photos. That's before they started stripping the interior. So we do have photographs of that. And so, but I think the whole question of how do you make sure this stuff, I mean, hey, I've got the photographs, but how do we make sure that this documentation gets preserved and it's really a curatorial thing? How does this stuff get curated over time? Who holds it? I mean, this may be something that at least the digital, maybe Lower Merion Historical Society, but it seems like the borough, and Matt may have an appetite for this. I mean, this may be something to have a conversation with him about, but if we're gonna be requiring, documentation, there's gotta be a place for it to go.
All right.
And probably there has to be a little bit of a budget attached to it. If it happens to be here in the borough, it's somebody's job to make that happen.
Yeah, well, maybe that's built into the cost that it's at the cost of the developer to make this happen, but I guess unless you can build in some sort of curatorial cost as well on behalf of the borough. I don't know, maybe you can. You guys charge exorbitant fees for processing this, that, and the other thing, but we'll have it.
Add more.
Yeah.
So I think right now, it's pretty comical in my opinion, but like when I think we were getting a feel for what this whole process would be, regardless of whether it was advisory or COA. So right now, advisory are still free, which I think is really nice to the borough because they're still paying me. So at a minimum, but the COA is $50 start to finish. I mean, it's really nothing. So I think they might want to revisit those, and if they want to add additional roles or responsibilities for whoever that is, maybe
Yeah.
pass that on through a application fee.
I think we should be careful not to make it too onerous
Right.
for applicants, because
Well, because applicants are already paying a lot in terms of fees
Yeah.
At times.
permits and things.
but owners in terms of time and expense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
We want them to feel that we are collaborating with them mostly. We're also strict school teachers, so we expect.
Well, this Haverford development project, I believe it has been onerous.
Yeah,
well,
well, it's getting too, I've sensed it maybe getting too onerous. And we don't want it to be so onerous that they stand up on their hind legs and say, no, you cannot make me do this. And that could happen, and we don't want that to happen. So if we make it too onerous, that's what, I can sense some vibration and
Well, the density bonus, I think, is a good incentive to get them on board. Or is the density bonus is good incentive to get them on board with the conditional use requests. They get another floor. We have some stipulations.
yeah,
I think it's a win-win.
we're not looking at the math. We have to look at the math when we say that.
Yeah, and the schedule.
anyway, okay, well, all right, is there any other new business? If not, I think we can adjourn.
Old business, and I'm just curious about what's happening at the Price House. Does anybody know, Kevin?
Kevin would not, I haven't heard a thing about it, and I heard like, it's not crickets, right? Kevin, crickets about Smith, or, about the price, or what?
Sorry, I'm my parents. I missed that last. Just trying to feed me
sorry.
pencils.
Ray was asking, what's the status of the Price House right now?
Nothing. I don't know how many of you know. Refugia moved into there is on a temporary lease, so they've kind of taken over the first floor, and part of the second floor is their offices. I believe it's a year. and you'll see they have like hoop houses and some things outside. So they were granted a unlimited waiver of time for land development. So I don't think anything's coming in anytime soon.
Okay, all right. So they're getting some return on the building
They're on hold, huh?
for development, though. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
all right, that's good. So,
It will be a 5-story garden.
I did notice, it looks like they've been cutting the grass more, recently, but it's all season.
Can I say one thing about our last meeting? I'm not sure if you were present virtually at this point, but I did feel as though there was a moment with Todd's comments and the late communication, where there's a palpable sense of confusion,
Yeah.
which I think was confirmed after the meeting.
Mhm.
And I just think that if someone like Todd, who is a member of the public in that context, but we also know that he plays a role in the borough, is going to communicate with us in a public setting like that for the first time, it can be destabilizing or undermine our role.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, looking back, essentially, when I was listening to him, he was strongly encouraging us to do something which I didn't know if we could do, and ultimately we didn't do it. But that's just something I think we should bear in mind for the future.
Yeah.
I think we've all learned the lesson.
Yeah, I did, definitely. And one lesson, I mean, which he said to me was, you know, why was the architect in the room if we never had a chance to talk with the architect?
Yeah. Well, and see, that's where some of the confusion, at least from my standpoint, is, I drafted that agenda not being aware at all that was gonna be a COA hearing. That we were gonna be like basically having to approve a COA. What I thought was gonna happen was what had happened before and with the planning commission the week before, which is that we were gonna be looking at another iteration of drawings as we've done in the past, and as the planning commission had done just the week before. It wasn't my understanding that was gonna be a COA review, and otherwise I never would have set you guys up for that, because we weren't prepared for that. We weren't prepared for a COA discussion at that time, and I think you
It
guys.
was a challenging situation because I was advised that the following Thursday was a borough council meeting to make a decision on that was dependent upon our action.
Yeah. Well, I think that timeline was not a real timeline.
That is the fog of war.
That's the part, yeah, sure.
Sorry, what?
That is the fog of war.
Why don't you explain that? I kind of know what you mean, but it's.
Well, does everybody know what that means? The
Please.
fog of war?
And I saw the Robert McNamara documentary about it.
That's-
When there's high anxiety and pressure brought to bear on all parties in a conflict, usually in a conflict, also sometimes in a tense negotiation, it's like a Murphy's Law, the corollary of Murphy's Law. There is always a tendency for there to be confusion, poor communication, misunderstanding. There's going to be a borough council meeting on an important decision next Thursday. Well, that's not true, but I have the same impression.
But to be clear, if I can just interject, having been a planning commission member, there is oftentimes a disconnect between the planners on planning commission and the architects on planning commission, because we sort of speak different languages. And so when we are both trying to reach a common goal, it can be a challenge and there can be miscommunication. And that's why sometimes I find that it's the follow-up correspondence via email and such that can clarify and also document at the same time what the intentions are.
There was a conversation about whether,
Yeah, you know what, I was gonna say, let's go ahead and then, I'd like to.
let me finish.
No. I would like to adjourn the meeting
And then we'll continue.
and then we'll continue. But I think we've done all of our business, and I think it's best that we do that. So, okay, so anyway, do I have a motion to adjourn? We've got all of our work done. We did it an hour and a half, which is good.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Jenny made the motion.
Okay.
Graham seconded.
We're all in favor.
We're all in favor. Okay, great. All right, so we're adjourned. We'll turn the recording off, but we'll keep the Zoom on.
Hold on.